Amen. So this morning we continue in our series, The Scroll of the 12, and today we've got Zephaniah. Now, Zephaniah, I'm going to be honest, I found this one a little bit difficult to prep for. I was like, man, I'm struggling through this. I get it, I understand sort of where it relates in the Scroll of the 12, and I got kind of an idea, but I'm also kind of struggling. And a little anecdote, I was walking down the high street this week, and I'm thinking about Zephaniah, and I'm thinking about how I'm struggling to kind of wrap my mind around it a little bit, and lo and behold, there are two Orthodox Jewish men on the high street, just there. And I thought, wow, I mean, a light to the Gentiles, teacher of the ignorant, right? So I walked past. I'm like, Peter, don't be ridiculous, because I've lived in the southeast of England long enough to make the right choice, and I walked on by. But then I thought, no, all right, you're rocking your curls, and you got your suit and your hat, you're letting me know you're here, all right? So I thought, no, I'm going back. I was going to say, hey, you might have some insight. So I rock up to these guys, I'm like, pardon me, gentlemen, and they're like, okay. I was like, so, you guys, here's the covenants, the patriarchs, the prophets, right? Can I ask you a question? And they're like, sure. I said, so, I'm studying the Scroll of 12, Zephaniah, what's the big, in your view, what's the big takeaway from Zephaniah? And the one guy goes, oh, you'd have to ask him. And, right? And I was like, okay, so I turned to him, and he's smoking a cigarette, right? And he's like, I'm not sure. I'm not sure what his name in Hebrew is. And I was like, I'm pretty sure it's Zephaniah. And by pretty sure, 100. I didn't say that. I was just thinking that. I was like, I don't know, but it's right before Haggai, right after Habakkuk. He's like, I don't know. I'm like, and I was like, okay, well that's fine. I just thought I would ask. So why do I tell you this story? Because you guys are all like, Peter, if you want to pull junk like that, move up north. Okay? We don't talk to people we know on the street, let alone strangers with theological questions. All right? So that's thing number one. Thing number two, Peter, that is the terrifying reason why I don't want other people to know that I'm a Christian, because they're going to ask me that question. I'm going to be like, I don't know what that guy's name is in Latin, so I don't think I'm able to answer your question, And I just want to encourage you. If these guys would have gone, actually, that's a good question, I'm not really sure, I would have been like, great, just thought I'd ask. And if somebody asks you a question, you don't know the answer, you say, that's a great question. I'm not really sure, to be honest. And they go, okay, great, just thought I'd ask. You know what I'm saying? So I just want to encourage you. That moment that I imposed on these two unsuspecting gentlemen who were minding their own business, wondering what was happening to the old HSBC building that's now going to be a shop, and kind of looking around. They just were minding their own business, and you might be minding your own business, and somebody might interrupt you, and ask you, because they can see you're a Christian. Maybe you're reading your Bible at the cafe or at the pub, or you're together doing that. You're reading your Bible together, you're praying, or you're on a walk, and somebody goes, are you a Christian? That actually also happened to me earlier this week at Starbucks. I was reading my Bible, I was prepping for Zephaniah, different day, and somebody goes, are you reading the Bible? I was like, yeah, I am. And I ended up getting into a lovely conversation with somebody about life and faith and church and that sort of thing. So just, if you don't be afraid to be known, and if somebody asks you a question that you don't know the answer to, it's perfectly legitimate to say, great question, not too sure about that. What do you think? And they'll go, I don't know, that's why I asked you. And then they're like, fair enough. And see what might happen. So Zephaniah. So I've been diving into Zephaniah a little bit. And before we get into Zephaniah, I didn't do a reading beforehand because I want to tell the story, but I also want to give a little bit of history to Zephaniah, a little bit more in depth than the history that we've kind of reviewed. And very, very quickly, I will read the first verse of Zephaniah. Zephaniah chapter 1, verse 1, the word of the Lord that came to Zephaniah, son of Cushi, the son of Gedaliah, the son of Amariah, the son of Hezekiah, during the reign of Josiah, son of Ammon, king of Judah. So that's a lot of names. You're like, I usually skip that verse and just get on to something that is meaningful to me. But actually, there's something interesting in here. Zephaniah has a prophetic ministry during the time of Josiah, son of Ammon, who is the son of Manasseh, who is the son of Hezekiah, king of Judah. Whether that Hezekiah, king of Judah, is the same Hezekiah that Zephaniah descends from, I don't know, and no one does. But we've talked about how through the scroll of the 12, these prophets are giving God's understanding of human history, particularly the history of the people of Israel during what we call the divided kingdom period. All right? So the nation of Israel, God made a promise to Abraham that through him all nations would be blessed and that his descendants would live in a particular bit of land. That promise, that covenant, extended to Isaac, and then extended to Isaac's son Jacob, who wrestled with the Lord and had his name changed to Israel. And Israel had 12 sons who became the 12 tribes of Israel, who ended up eventually enslaved in Egypt for 400 years. After which God delivered them from slavery by Moses' ministry and brings them to Mount Sinai and says, I'm going to be your God, you're going to be my people. The promises that I made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, whose name was changed to Israel, about being a blessing to all nations and living in a land, you are going to realize those promises. I'm going to bring you into that land, and I'm giving you a law. And when you are faithful to that law, you will live well in the land. When you are unfaithful to the law and those covenants, it will go badly for you, and you will get conquered by foreign armies, spat out of the land, but in faithfulness to Abraham, I'm going to bring you back and restore you. Right now, in Leviticus, careful, buckle up, guys. Leviticus, all right? That's another one I skip. Leviticus, we're going to go in chapter 18. Now, chapter 18 is the funny one. We're not going to read the whole chapter because it's basically going to give a long list of sexual ethics, all right? But this is what I want to notice, because people are like, the God of the Old Testament is a xenophobic, genocidal lunatic who's going to smash all of the Canaanites. Rah! Okay? What we're going to find out in this reading is that the land itself is sacred to the Lord. It's set apart. And whoever lives in the land is expected to live faithfully to God. And if they don't, the land will not house them anymore, as it were. So listen to what we read in chapter 18, verse 24 of Leviticus. God saying to the Israelites, do not defile yourselves in any of these ways, because this is how the nations that I'm going to drive out before you became defiled. Even the land was defiled, so I punished it for its sin, and the land vomited out its inhabitants. But you must keep my decrees and my laws. The native born and the foreigner residing among you must not do any of these detestable things. For all these things were done by the people who lived in the land before you, and the land became defiled. And if you defile the land, it will vomit you out as it vomited out the nations that were before you. Right? And then again in Leviticus chapter 20, verse 22. Keep all my decrees and laws and follow them, so that the land where I am bringing you to live may not vomit you out. Now, some of you are like, the land vomiting out. That's like, there's some personification to the land there. There's some personifications of the Lamb. Some of you might even be thinking like, oh, isn't there a line in Revelation where Jesus is driving the church of Laodicea? It says, because you're neither hot nor cold, I'm going to vomit you out of my mouth. And we typically understand that in terms of lukewarm water. And that's right, because Jesus says you're not hot or cold, you're lukewarm. Therefore, I'm going to vomit you out. And so it's kind of like, have you ever had a glass of tepid water? It's like, it's not hot, it's not cold, it's just kind of like, and so, like, gross. It has that connotation, but there's also an allusion that Jesus is the Lamb, as it were. There's this idea that faithfulness to God is necessary, and the land is gonna vomit the people out if and when they are unfaithful to God's word and unfaithful to God's covenants and live like unfaithfully. And so that's what we're seeing, actually, when we get to Zephaniah. Now, before we get deeper into the text, some other historical stuff that you can read about in 2 Kings and 2 Chronicles. We talked about Hezekiah last week. Hezekiah was a good king, even though the Assyrians had surrounded and were sieging Jerusalem through prophetic ministries and other things like that. Hezekiah discovered the book of the law hidden away in the temple somewhere. They all repented. They celebrated the Passover for the first time in a long, long time, and things were good. And the Assyrians were able to be withstood. The Assyrians had to go back because there was an attack. Anyway, long story short, Jerusalem was spared. But then after Hezekiah came Manasseh. Manasseh was not like Hezekiah. Manasseh was all about like encouraging people to not only worship Yahweh, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, whose name was changed to Israel, according to his covenants in the temple, but set up Asherah poles and altars to Baal. Asherah and Baal were other Canaanite gods, false gods. And he even worshiped these false gods in the temple, which was a serious no-no. Even was setting up images of other gods in the temple to Yahweh. Even sacrificed his own son to Moloch on the altar in the temple. This is a not good, like very bad thing. Not good, very bad thing. And so things went very badly. We read in 2 Chronicles that actually Manasseh got carried off into exile where he had to come to the Lord moment, and he repented. And he was actually restored, which is interesting. Normally we refer to like wicked King Manasseh, but because we don't read Chronicles because there's too many lists of names, we're like, boring. But actually Manasseh gets restored, interestingly enough. Here's a little side, this guy can hang out right here. It really only takes one generation. It only takes one generation. In both directions. Hezekiah turned everything around in his faithfulness. Manasseh turned everything around in his faithlessness, or his unfaithfulness. There's a rumor, there's some speculation that during that time, those who were faithful to God carried out the Ark of the Covenant, brought it out of the temple, because there's a vision in Ezekiel about the glory of the Lord leaving the temple, and this is fascinating stuff. The Nile River, right in Egypt, right, and it goes all the way down, and you follow it upstream, and it goes south to what we call Sudan now, all the way to Ethiopia, and Uganda, to depending on whether it's the blue or the white Nile, different origins. Somewhere in southern Egypt, there's a place called Elephantine Island. Well, it's now called Elephantine Island. And on Elephantine Island, there's a mini replica of the Jewish temple in Jerusalem. It's just like a smaller version. And there's a theory that those who were faithful brought the Ark of the Covenant to Elephantine Island. And it was, the Ark of the Covenant was in exile there for a period of time. The reason that's going to become important in just a moment is we're going to come across in Zephaniah, Cush. And Cush is sort of southern Egypt, northern Sudan, like that kind of area of the Nile River, sometimes called Nubia. But anyhow, so Manasseh comes back. He kind of tidies some things up, but not totally. And then his son Ammon was just a bad dude. He was only on the throne for 2 years before he got assassinated, because he wasn't a good king at all. And then Josiah becomes king when he's 8 years old. Right? And he's got somebody who kind of stewards and helps him along. And eventually, Josiah finds the book of the law again. And Passover is celebrated again for the first time since kind of Hezekiah. One of the things, it only takes one generation either direction. Right? We can't ever get lackadaisical about things. It can all go to pot with your generation. It can all be restored with your generation. It could all be preserved in your generation. Right? Okay, so that's a little bit of background. It's all going to come to make sense, hopefully, in the next, how long are you going to say, Peter? Dun, dun, dun. All right. So, Zephaniah is ministering during the time of Josiah, perhaps instrumental in Josiah's reforms, because he identifies sin in Judah. And of course, we know from last week, the Babylonians, they're coming. And indeed, the land is going to vomit out the inhabitants. But there's just a little bit of a stall here during the time of Josiah. But read in verse 2 of chapter 1. This is hard reading. I will sweep away everything from the face of the earth, declares the Lord. Let's just put that on a fridge magnet, maybe put on a post on your dashboard, maybe your wallpaper on your mobile phone, something inspirational. Yeah. I will wipe away everything from the face of the earth. I will sweep away both man and beast. I will sweep away the birds of the sky and the fish of the sea and the idols that cause the wicked to stumble, when I destroy all mankind on the face of the earth, declares the Lord. Yowzers. We're going to pause there. Let's just stop for a second. Now, there is a translation and an interpretive question around this, because there's good reason to translate the Hebrew not like the whole face of the whole earth, but I will sweep away everything from the face of the land. Right? When I destroy all mankind on the face of the land, with a specific sort of emphasis on the land of promise, the land that we would now call Israel, Palestine, the Holy Land, the Promised Land, that kind of thing. And that what Zephaniah, in his immediate context, they're saying, actually, because of our unfaithfulness to the Lord, because of our unfaithfulness to the covenant, the land is going to vomit us out. Foreign armies are going to come in, conquer us, and exile us. That's going to happen. And that there's a strong sort of translation reason for understanding it that way. And it comes up again and again as you read Zephaniah. You'll like this whole idea of sweep away everything from the whole face of the earth. And it could be read the whole face of the land. However, in this verse 3, we see something also interesting. I will sweep away both man and beast, the birds of the sky, the fish of the sea. And so there's a sense where there's almost an inversion of the whole creation order, right? God creates the land, he creates the waters, and he creates the sky, and then he creates fish and things in the sea, and then there's birds in the air, beasts and things along the ground, and then mankind. So there's a sort of a destruction of all creation, which then leads us to go, is he really talking about the land, or is he talking about everything? Really, everything. And here's what I would offer. When we get into sort of chapters 2 and following, 2 into 3, there are judgments and warnings against Judah. There are judgments and warnings against what? Against the Philistines, Gaza. There are judgments and warnings against Moab and Ammon, which would be sort of southwestern Jordan, modern-day Jordan. And there would be, there's warnings against Cush, and the Egyptians, who at the time were kind of colliding. So as the Assyrians were retreating, the Egyptians were progressing into that part of the world, and then the Babylonians are going to come in and sort of take it on. But the Egyptians are getting in there and involved, and of course Jerusalem itself. And what we see is all of the judgments that are elaborated on in Zephaniah chapters 2 and into 3 are related to people who live or are possessing part of this promised land, this land that had been promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, whose name was changed to Israel. So again, another interpretive reason to go, actually this is talking about just a specific part of the land, a specific plot of land rather than the whole of the earth. Okay? And of course, there's restoration. We'll get to this a little bit more towards the end. But the end of Zephaniah chapter 3, which kind of finishes up the whole book, is this restoration. Verse 9 of chapter 3, then I will purify the lips of the people. That's the idea of cleansing, because if your lips were unclean, you were a leper. And being leprous was to be sinful and unclean. Right, so I'll purify the lips of the peoples, that all of them may call on the name of the Lord and serve him shoulder to shoulder. From beyond the rivers of Cush, my worshipers, my scattered people will bring me offerings. Right, so the idea there's these Jewish people on Elephantine Island, they need to come back. You know, these people who've been exiled by Assyria and will be exiled by Babylonia, they're going to come back. People who've been scattered all over the world are going to come back. There's going to be this restoration. Verse 11, on that day Jerusalem will not be put to shame for all the wrongs you have done to me, because I will remove from you your arrogant boasts. Verse 14, sing, daughter Zion, shout aloud, Israel. Be glad and rejoice with all your heart, daughter Jerusalem. The Lord has taken away your punishment. He has turned back your enemy. The Lord, the King of Israel, is with you. Never again will you fear any harm. Verse 17, a classic verse from Zephaniah. This is normally the fridge magnet. The Lord your God is with you, the mighty warrior who saves. He will take great delight in you. He will love you. In his love, he will no longer rebuke you, but will rejoice over you with singing. Right? And this idea of restoration, being brought back together, that feels really nice. And actually, that serves as a transition to the last three of the scroll of the 12, Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi, who are post-exilic prophets. In other words, after the Israelites have been in exile and they get back to the land, they are prophets during that time of restoration. So Zephaniah is tricky because there's a tricky history that is a part of it. There is it's tricky because there's some translation kinds of things that play into it, which are difficult to do properly, that have to do with the whole context of the book. And it serves to transition the whole scroll of the 12 from the divided kingdom period and all of the judgment and discipline that's coming to the post-exile period where there's restoration. So what on earth, Peter, are you going to say after you've said all of this? I do believe there is sense in translating Zephaniah's concerns about judgment over the whole earth as in the judgment over the whole land, as in the land of promise. However, at the end of the day, God's activity throughout all of human history is teaching us a smaller lesson in order to communicate to us a larger lesson. Right? God teaching us a smaller lesson or a first lesson so that we can understand the bigger lesson. I was at St. John's School with their year sixes on Friday, and they're asking, it's like quiz the vicar kind of thing. And and eventually got to his questions about the Passover and about Good Friday and all kinds of things like that. And the notion came up about how God desires mercy and not sacrifice, right? And then the kid asked, well, then why did God ever ask for sacrifice? And the answer, one of the answers, is because we wouldn't know we wouldn't understand the meaning of God being a God who desires mercy and not sacrifice if we didn't also understand sacrifice. You've got to understand sacrifice first before the fact that God desires mercy over sacrifice, to make sense to you. Does that make sense? Did you get it? So there's a way in which we would say as Christians, the earth is the Lord's and everything in it. Right? And in Genesis, when God creates the world, it's all his. And we would say God is omnipresent, right? The psalmist says, where can I go to flee from your spirit? If I go on the other side of the earth, you're there. If I go in the depths, you're there. Wherever I go, whatever I do, you're there. The earth is the Lord's and everything in it. God dwells in the whole of the earth. However, through human interaction, through human activity, though we were made in God's image and likeness to be the extension of his rule and his reign in the earth where he dwells, we, rather than submitting to his rule and reign and being the extension of it, said we're going to do things our way. We're going to be the rulers and we're going to reign, not God. And so our corruption has filled the whole earth. Relatively non-controversial statement these days. We're all very clear on how human activity has wrought violence and destruction in and on the earth. And so God is in the process of bringing his creation back to the goodness and to the very goodness that he created it with. And so there's the land, this promised land, that acts as a microcosm, as a small-scale model of what should be over the whole earth. Because we tend to need something smaller before we can understand something bigger, don't we? Give me a model. Give me an illustration on a piece of paper. We need to understand something smaller that our minds can wrap around first, and then our minds can wrap around the bigger thing. Yet further says the land, and then there's the temple, which is sort of modeled, the specifications for the temple make it sort of this kind of model of all of creation. So that we can say, what's true of the temple is true of the land. And actually, what's true of the land is true of the earth. And so the prophets would say things like the knowledge of the glory of the Lord covering the earth like the waters cover the sea. And so Zephaniah, I think it's fine to be translated, and it's right to be translated. I will sweep away everything from the face of the earth. The land had this sort of sacred status. Is that the right word? That if people didn't live on it faithfully to God, the land itself would vomit them out. You make me sick. Have you ever, this is going to be a bit graphic, the kids are in the other room, so it's okay. Have you ever, maybe like you had a mouth injury or a bleeding nose, and you've actually swallowed enough blood that you've gotten sick? Has that ever happened to you? I hope it hasn't. Do you know that this is a thing that can happen? Yeah? Right? There's this interesting thread throughout the Old Testament, all the way back from when Cain kills Abel, and God said, his blood is crying out to me from the ground. just before the flood, the earth was filled with violence. And there's this sense of bloodshed soaking into the ground of the promised land and making the land sick. There's this sense of sin building up in the land and making the land sick. And not just a material like, well, yes, when we pollute too much, then the land gets sick because it's chemically infected and it's got microplastic. Okay, yeah, fine, there's that. Cool. But more profoundly than that, there's a spiritual illness in the physical creation because of our sin. And that's not just for the promised land, that's for the whole world. And so, well, what do? You got to wipe it away. You got to sweep it away. You've got to purge the illness. One way or another, when you get the flu, you've got to purge the illness, and your body will purge it. Sometimes with a little bit of, D&V, you know what I'm saying? Because your body needs to purge that. Otherwise, sometimes we need to get medicine or something that will kill the infection, cleanse our bodies from that infection. And after that purging, after that cleansing, we're healthy again. And we can be the way we need to be. And that's sort of, I think, what Zephaniah is communicating. Zephaniah is communicating the first sort of 2.5 chapters. This whole sense of, from an understanding of the promised land, we can extrapolate and go, actually, the whole earth is infected. The whole earth is ill because of the unfaithfulness of humanity to the God in whom, how do I want to structure the sentence? Whose image and likeness we don't just bear, we are. So how do we achieve the restoration? And this is why we're going to be easy because of time. How do we achieve this restoration? After the land itself is sick, vomits out the inhabitants. After God is saying, enough is enough, I need to cleanse and purge and sweep all this junk away to restore health. How do we get there? I wish it was so easy as like a procedure. I wish there was like a nice, assembly line kind of do this, do that, do the other thing, and bada bing, bada boom. Out the other end, you have a widget that's healthy and experiences God's blessing. At a certain level, how does that happen? It happens because God chooses it to happen. At a certain level, it just happens because God chooses for it to happen. And he chooses his timing, and he chooses his way. And he will do it. He will purge the evil, and he will restore to goodness. And the kind of goodness we read about in the latter half, in the concluding verses of chapter 3. Removing mourning and oppression and all the rest of it so that we can sing and we can have joy. And God himself sings and has joy over us, taking great delight in us. What is God's way of doing that? Well, in the scroll of the 12, we're going to find out, God brings the nation of Israel back into the land. But all of these sort of promises of restoration, they're still kind of going, yeah, but. And they're waiting for something. And we as Christians recognize that which they were waiting for as being Jesus. Jesus is the temple. Jesus is the land. Jesus is the sacrifice. Jesus is all of it. Jesus is everything. And in him, everything holds together. And so all of the brokenness of creation, all of the stuff in us that is the cause of the brokenness in creation, he gathers into his own body. Right? All of the blood of all of the violence becomes his. He receives all of the violence, shed all the blood. All of the residue of our wickedness, which builds up in the land, actually builds up on him. He receives it all, and then puts it away and leaves it in the grave in his resurrection. So that in him, everything, you, me, the land, the birds, the beasts, the fish, the air, everything can be and will be restored. Everything that is associated to him by faith. Faithfulness. Faithfulness to Christ. It will be restored to the very good quality of God's original creation. And some would argue even yet better. That the recreation isn't just like a refurbishment. It's a wholesale renewal. Something entirely new and better. And so that's why we're Christians. Well, that's why I'm a Christian. That's why many of you are Christians. Is we want to participate in that. We want to acknowledge the way God has received all that stuff in himself. All the sin, all the violence, and all the junk. Has resolved it and set it aside. And opened the way for restoration. For joy. For song. For dance. For celebration. For wholeness. For healing. And for the kinds of good things that are read about in the end of Zephaniah. Sorry, I know that's a bit more of a like 30,000 feet kind of a talk. But let's stand and we're gonna sing. We're gonna have a time of worship as we get ready for confession, and just see what the Lord might have to say to our hearts and our minds as we prepare for confession.